Teal dear, something of a follow-up video today because I do like to keep the odd tab on some things which I talk about, especially when it looks like something that's going to have some kind of resolution at some point in the future. And in this instance, I have not been disappointed. There has been a resolution, although I must say, I am disappointed in the actual resolution. So first up, a little bit of backstory, and then I'll cover what is happening in the current day. A few months ago, February to be exact, I put out a video titled The Consensual Rape of Nikki Avino. Unsurprisingly, it was another video in the little mini-series that I occasionally visit, The Consensual Rape Of, and it just looks at false rape allegations where someone had completely consensual sex. All evidence points to the sex being completely consensual. There are mountains of evidence on the side suggesting that the sex was consensual, and yet the person goes ahead and makes a rape allegation anyway. Now, this case was slightly more curious than some of the other ones that I've talked about. In this case, it was this woman, Nikki Avino, who at an off-campus drinking party went into a bathroom with two men whom she proceeded to have sex with. Now, there are witnesses at the party who note that she went in willingly with these two men. There was no sign of resistance, there was no sign of struggle or anything like that. And later on, after the accusation was made, a series of text messages was produced, having happened before the incident in question, that seemed to indicate that Nikki was, how shall we say, not opposed to the undertaking that went ahead. Basically, she wanted it bad. And then she got it. But it was still rape. In her mind, anyway. And her mind is the next stop on the train of WTF that is this entire saga. Because when pressured about the various inconsistencies in her story, Nikki then admitted that she made up the allegation completely falsely, but did so as a means of getting a third man to feel sorry for her, to be made angry at her attackers, and ultimately to try to get him to fall in love with her. Yes, apparently this woman thinks that guys find it really super hot when you tell them that you were the victim of gang rape. 'Cause, you know, when you're trying to start a relationship with a guy, he absolutely 100% wants to hear about that one time a couple of other dudes spent the night making sure you were completely airtight. So, in that video I noted a few rather interesting things. Well, at least things that I found interesting. First of all, at the time, the big contention, or the big point that was really being hammered home, was that this girl was mostly standing trial for the fabrication and tampering with evidence charge, and not necessarily so much the false allegation charge. And I also noted at the time that the men in question in this encounter were being accused of a Class A felony, which would carry a sentence of anywhere from 10 to 25 years. And I found both of those points to be pretty interesting. First of all, because the fabrication and tampering with evidence was taking precedent over the fact that you're lying about people committing a crime, and I also like to note the potential punishment for the men involved in false allegation cases, because there is often a case made that if a woman accuses a man falsely of rape, that she should undergo the same punishment that he would have, should he have been guilty. And thus, with all of that information out of the way, let us consider what has actually happened now. And I'm sure you'll very rapidly be able to deduce my slight disappointment in this case. The former Sacred Heart University student accused of making up rape allegations against two football players to gain sympathy from a prospective boyfriend learned Thursday that prosecutors want her to serve 2 years in prison. Wow, look at that. 2 whole years in prison. And keep in mind, in the previous video on this, we established that the tampering charge that she was under, presumably for manipulating the text messages that were then used as evidence, that was a felony punishable with up to 5 years in prison. So 2 guys falsely accused of rape could have spent anywhere from 1 to 2.5 decades in prison. The false accuser who was messing around with evidence, we'll give her 2 years. Yeah, you know, that really does seem completely balanced, doesn't it? But the 2 years in prison is only a part of the potential punishment. The other part of this plea deal was also 3 years of probation taken after the 2 years imprisonment. However, even though this has basically completely exonerated the two men involved from any wrongdoing, just to give you a little idea about how much false rape allegations do still affect them, even after their names have been cleared, and it should be noted that this is the case for all false rape allegations. The lawyer representing the two men involved said that he's going to be consulting with both of his clients regarding this particular plea deal, but that same lawyer has also noted that both of his clients are scheduled for a school disciplinary hearing, but on taking legal advice they have decided simply to withdraw from the university rather than face being expelled and having the expulsion on their records. So first of all, there was the potential for expelling, which seems like it would have been almost inevitable, which messes up their record, so instead they have to leave their education, which is going to set it back by however many years. But you may also remember from our previous video on this topic, both of the men involved in this were at this particular institute on scholarship. So it's nice to know that that's also been completely wasted. And when you take all of this stuff into consideration here, I still find it so very bizarre that there are people out there who will actively try and deny that false rape allegations affect men. They just seem to have in their mind this strange little fantasy land where a man falsely accused of rape just goes about his daily business as if nothing has ever happened. As if, at the mere accusation, they don't lose their education, lose their job, lose whatever social standing they've had, and in some cases are hunted down by vigilante mobs and attacked or beaten to death. So with all of that in mind, it should really come as no surprise that their lawyer has simply said, this has just been a nightmare for them. And I can't help but get the very distinct feeling that it's going to be a nightmare that isn't going to end anytime soon. Because of course, if they've had to drop out of universities as a result of this false allegation, if they should then choose to continue seeking higher education, and honestly I wouldn't blame them if they didn't, given this horrendously negative experience, it could quite easily sour anyone on the prospect. But at the next place they go to, there's going to be the question of, well, you were at this institute on a scholarship, why did you just drop out? At which point they're either going to have to come clean and talk about the false rape allegation, which despite the fact that it has been proven to be false, there will still be people out there who believe that a rape happened. And if they don't come clean about the false rape allegation and they just say something like, oh, it wasn't for me, there was just, I wasn't enjoying it or something like that, then that's going to call into question their commitment to the education that they're seeking. And as if this nightmare isn't bad enough, there is the potential for it to be reopened, because apparently this case was supposed to have been dealt with on June 26th. Basically, that was supposed to be the deadline by which Jovino decided whether she wanted to take the deal or not. However, it would appear, based on this source which I've dug up, which seems to be the only one reporting on this past the 26th, she has been granted an additional 3 weeks to decide. And rather interestingly, the judge who was currently presiding over this case has been transferred to a different case, so now she's going to be facing a different judge. So of course at this point she hasn't accepted the plea deal of 2 years imprisonment and 3 on probation, so she is of course therefore still contesting the rape, and as a result it's possible that this second judge coming in may have a slightly different perspective on things. And it's just a whole new person that she and her lawyer can play up to. So it seems as though we're not going to have anything absolutely concrete for another several weeks. And of course, given the extra time and the potential of the new judge, her lawyer has of course stated it is premature at this point, as we are still investigating the case and possible defences, and that was in regards to how she's currently leaning on accepting or declining the deal. So all things considered, there's a number of ways that this could potentially swing. She could find herself with a more lenient judge who's going to offer her even less than she's currently offered. She may find herself in the presence of a more harsh judge who's going to push for an even longer sentence, or it may just be a judge that comes in, sits down and says, I completely agree with the judgment that's already been passed, make your choice. And honestly, on a personal note, I kind of hope it leans towards a judge who's going to push this a little bit more harshly. 2 years for 2 false rape allegations, as well as tampering with evidence? just seems laughably small to me. And 3 years of probation, well, it depends somewhat on the exact terms of the probation, but if it ends up as just being something like, well, it's 3 years of just once a week you have to go and have a little half-hour meeting with an officer somewhere, it's not really a massive punishment, more of a mild inconvenience. But time will tell what the exact terms of that will be, assuming, of course, that she goes ahead with this bargain, or if they try to push for another one, which may or may not include probation. So unfortunately for this case, it's going to be another few weeks of waiting. But I figured that this was a rather interesting one to follow up on, especially given the slightly bizarre nature of the original situation. False rape allegations to try to trick some other guy into loving you? That's just odd.